Everyone thought I was just the quiet office girl who jumped at loud noises and couldn't hurt a fly. My colleagues laughed when I fumbled with the security training gun, shaking like a leaf. They had no idea that behind my trembling hands was a secret that would soon save all their lives. If you love stories about hidden strength and shocking reveals, hit that like button now and stick around, because this story will blow your mind. My name is Rebecca, and I've been working as an office administrator at Morrison & Associates for 3 years now. It's one of those prestigious law firms where everyone thinks they're more important than they actually are. The kind of place where people measure their worth by the brand of their briefcase and how loud they can talk in the hallway. I learned early on that being invisible was my greatest weapon, even if I didn't know I'd need it yet. James Morrison, the senior partner, was exactly what you'd expect from a man who inherited his daddy's law firm. Arrogant, entitled, and completely convinced that his expensive suits made him untouchable. He had this way of looking right through people like me, as if we were just furniture in his perfect world. Linda, the paralegal, wasn't much better. She lived for office gossip and had this sharp tongue that could cut glass when she wanted it to. Then there was Alex, our security chief, who took his job way too seriously, and Hannah, the sweet receptionist who always had a kind word for everyone. The day everything started to unravel was during our mandatory security training. Every year, the company brought in this ex-cop to teach us basic safety protocols. You know, the usual stuff about emergency exits, what to do if someone suspicious enters the building, and yes, basic firearm handling. I remember standing in that conference room, watching Alex demonstrate proper gun safety, and I knew I had to play my part perfectly. When it was my turn to handle the practice weapon, I let my hands shake exactly the right amount. Not too much to seem fake, but enough to make everyone uncomfortable. I fumbled with the grip, pointed it in completely the wrong direction, and even dropped it once for good measure. The gasps and nervous laughter from my colleagues told me I was selling it perfectly. James actually rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might fall out of his head. Rebecca couldn't hurt a mosquito if it bit her, he said with that condescending smirk of his, and everyone laughed. Even Linda chimed in with something about how I probably apologized to my coffee maker every morning. They all thought it was so funny, watching me struggle with something as simple as holding a gun properly. If only they knew that I could put 3 rounds through a target at 500 yards without breaking a sweat. You see, what none of them realized is that I wasn't actually Rebecca, the helpless office administrator. Well, I was Rebecca, but that was just the surface. Underneath that carefully constructed persona was someone who had spent 4 years as a military sharpshooter, someone who had earned medals for marksmanship that most of these people couldn't even pronounce. But my real identity, my real purpose for being at Morrison & Associates was something even deeper than that. The funny thing about being undercover is that you start to notice things other people miss. Like how James had been staying late more often, taking hushed phone calls in his office with the door closed, or how certain client files kept disappearing and reappearing in different places. Little things that would seem innocent to anyone else, but when you're trained to spot patterns, they start to form a picture you don't like. I'd been watching strange men lurking around our building for weeks. They were good at blending in, I'll give them that, but not good enough. One would sit in the coffee shop across the street for hours without ordering anything. Another would walk past our building multiple times a day, always glancing up at the windows. When I mentioned it casually to my colleagues, they just brushed it off. "You're being paranoid, Rebecca," Linda said with a laugh. "Who would want to case a boring old law firm?" But I wasn't being paranoid. I was being careful. And as the days passed, I started to realize that my carefully maintained cover was about to be put to the ultimate test. The moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday evening. I was working late, finishing up some filing that could have easily waited until morning, but I've learned that the best intelligence comes when people think they're alone. The office was mostly empty, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic 15 floors below. That's when I heard James's voice coming from his office, and something in his tone made every instinct I had trained over the years suddenly snap to attention. I moved closer to his door, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished marble floor. What I heard made my blood run cold. James wasn't talking to a client about legal strategy or settlement negotiations. He was talking to someone about security schedules, about when the building would have the fewest guards, about which files contained the most sensitive information. He was selling out his own firm, his own employees, his own clients. "Friday night's perfect," he was saying, his voice low but not low enough. "Everyone will be here for the quarterly meeting. You'll have access to everything you need and plenty of hostages to keep things quiet." The word hostages hit me like a punch to the stomach. These weren't just thieves planning a simple robbery. This was something much worse, and James was handing us all over like we were nothing more than collateral damage. I backed away from the door, my mind racing through possibilities and escape routes, when the worst thing that could happen actually happened. The door swung open, and James walked out, nearly colliding with me. For a split second, we both froze, and I saw something shift in his eyes. He knew that I had heard something. The question was how much. "Rebecca?" he said, and his voice had this edge to it that I'd never heard before. "Working late again? You really need to get a life." But his hand was already moving toward my arm, gripping it just hard enough to let me know this wasn't a casual conversation anymore. His fingers dug into my skin, and I could smell the expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of his fear and anger. I did what Rebecca, the helpless administrator, would do. I stammered. I looked confused. I tried to pull away weakly while making my voice shake with just the right amount of terror. "I was just filing the Peterson documents. I'm sorry if I disturbed you, Mr. Morrison. I didn't hear anything, I swear." The lie rolled off my tongue easily, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't buying it. "You didn't hear anything?" His grip tightened, and I had to remind myself not to break his wrist, which would have been as natural as breathing at that point, because what I was discussing in there was very private client business, very confidential, the kind of thing that could ruin careers if it got out to the wrong people. "Please don't hurt me," I whispered, letting real tears form in my eyes. Not tears of fear, but tears of rage at having to play this pathetic character while this monster planned to destroy innocent lives. "I won't tell anyone. I promise. I just want to go home." That's when he hit me. Not a punch, but a sharp, stinging slap across my face that sent my head snapping to the side. The sound echoed in the empty hallway like a gunshot. "That's right, you won't tell anyone," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Because who would believe someone like you? A pathetic little mouse who can't even hold a gun without crying." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Here he was, calling me pathetic while planning to betray everyone who trusted him. The slap stung, but what burned worse was having to stand there and take it, having to let him think he had power over me. If he only knew that I could end him in a dozen different ways before he could blink. Just then, Linda appeared around the corner, probably coming back for something she'd forgotten. Her eyes went wide when she saw us, saw my red cheek, saw the way James was standing over me. But James was smooth, I'll give him that. His whole posture changed in an instant. "Oh, Linda, thank God you're here," he said, his voice suddenly full of concern. "Poor Rebecca had a little accident. Walked right into the filing cabinet door. I was just making sure she was okay." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment even I almost believed it. Linda looked between us, clearly sensing something was wrong, but not quite sure what. "Are you all right, honey?" she asked me, and I nodded weakly, playing the part while inside I was memorizing every detail of James's face, every word he'd said on that phone call. He thought he was so clever, so untouchable. He had no idea that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Friday night came faster than I wanted it to. All day, I watched my colleagues going about their normal routines, completely unaware that they were walking into a trap. Hannah was excited about the quarterly bonuses that would be announced at the meeting. Linda was complaining about having to work late on a Friday. Alex was doing his usual security rounds, checking locks and cameras with no idea that the real threat was already inside the building. And James was playing his part perfectly, acting like the concerned boss who just wanted to get through the quarterly report so everyone could go home. But I wasn't just sitting there helplessly. While everyone else was focused on spreadsheets and presentations, I was mentally mapping every inch of the building, every possible entry point, every place someone could take cover. I'd already identified the 3 men from my surveillance, and I knew they were coming tonight. What James didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The scared little administrator routine was about to come to an end. The attack came exactly when James said it would. We were all gathered in the main conference room, going over fourth quarter numbers, when the lights suddenly went out. In the darkness, I heard the elevator doors opening, footsteps moving quickly down the hallway. My colleagues started to panic, but I was already moving, using the chaos to position myself where I needed to be. When the lights came back on, 3 armed men in black masks stood at the entrance to the conference room. They looked exactly like what central casting would order for a robbery scene, all black clothes and intimidating weapons. But I could see the nervousness in their movements, the way they kept glancing at James for confirmation. These weren't seasoned professionals, they were thugs, and that made them more dangerous because they were unpredictable. "Nobody move!" the first one shouted, and Hannah let out a terrified scream that cut through me like a knife. She was pressed against the far wall, her face white with terror, and I could see her hands shaking as she tried to make herself smaller. Linda had dropped to the floor behind her chair, and Alex was slowly reaching for his radio before the second gunman pointed his weapon directly at him. "Don't even think about it, security man," the gunman said with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Hands where we can see them. All of you." I raised my hands like everyone else, but my eyes were calculating distances, angles, weaknesses. The first gunman was too close to Hannah, the second was focused on Alex, the third was watching James, and I could see something pass between them, a look of recognition that confirmed everything I'd suspected. That's when the first gunman made his mistake. He moved toward Hannah, reaching out to grab her arm, and she tried to back away. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, the same words I'd said to James the night before. But this animal just laughed and shoved her hard against the wall. Hannah's head hit the corner of a filing cabinet, and I watched her crumple to the floor, a thin line of blood trickling from her temple. Something inside me broke. Not broke, really. More like a dam bursting. All the weeks of playing weak, all the months of biting my tongue and pretending to be harmless, all of it just evaporated in that instant. Hannah was the sweetest person in this entire building, the one person who'd never said a cruel word to anyone, and this monster had just hurt her because he could. I felt my posture change before I even made the conscious decision. My shoulders straightened, my breathing deepened, and when I spoke, my voice came out completely different. Not the trembling whisper of scared Rebecca, but the cold, controlled tone of someone who'd been trained to kill. "That's far enough." The room went dead silent. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. Even the gunman seemed thrown off by the change in my voice. James was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, his mouth slightly open in shock. The first gunman laughed, but it sounded forced now. "What did you say, office girl?" I took a step forward, and I watched him instinctively take a step back. "I said that's far enough. You made 2 mistakes tonight. First, you hurt someone I care about. Second, you believed I was helpless." The transformation was complete now. 3 years of pretending to be weak, of jumping at shadows and fumbling with simple tasks, it was all gone. I stood tall, my training evident in every line of my body, and for the first time since I'd started this job, I let them see exactly who I really was. What happened next was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance, except it was 3 years of military training finally being unleashed. The first gunman was still trying to process what he was seeing when I moved. In one fluid motion, I grabbed his wrist, twisted it until I heard bones crack, and the weapon clattered to the floor. His scream of pain was cut short when my elbow connected with his throat, and he dropped like a stone. The second gunman swung his weapon toward me, but I was already rolling behind the conference table. I heard the sharp crack of gunfire, wood splintering above my head, and then I was up and moving again. He was good, I'll give him that, but he was also terrified. Fear makes people sloppy, and I'd been trained to use that against them. I came up behind him before he could track my movement, and a quick strike to the base of his skull sent him crashing into the wall. But it was the third gunman who provided the most poetic justice of the evening. In his panic, he'd grabbed the nearest person to use as a human shield, and fate decided that person should be James Morrison himself. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. Here was James, the man who'd sold us all out, now begging for his life from the very criminals he'd invited into our building. "Help me!" James screamed, his voice cracking with terror as the gunman's arm tightened around his throat. "Do something! You have to save me!" The desperation in his voice was music to my ears. This was the same man who'd called me pathetic, who'd slapped me and threatened me, now crying for help from the woman he thought was too weak to protect anyone. I stood perfectly still, the captured weapons in my hands, and looked James directly in the eyes. Why would I help a traitor? My voice was calm, almost conversational, and I watched the color drain from his face as the full implications hit him. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, but the gunman was starting to realize something was very wrong with this whole situation. "Tell them, James," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd interrogated enemy combatants. "Tell everyone in this room how you sold them out. Tell them about the phone call I overheard, about how you planned to let your own employees be hurt so you could steal client files and blame it on a robbery." The room erupted in gasps and angry voices. Linda was staring at James with pure hatred in her eyes. Alex looked like he wanted to strangle him with his bare hands. Even Hannah, who was sitting up now with blood still trickling from her head wound, was looking at him with disgust. "That's not true," James shouted, but his voice cracked, and everyone could hear the lie in it. "She's insane. She's making it up." That's when I decided it was time for the final revelation. "My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm a federal agent working with the Financial Crimes Division. I've been undercover here for 3 years, investigating reports of client data theft and money laundering. James Morrison, you've been under surveillance, and every conversation you've had with these criminals has been recorded." The silence that followed was deafening. James's face went from red to white to green in the space of a few seconds. The gunman holding him started to back toward the door, finally realizing he'd walked into a trap that was much bigger than a simple robbery. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and about 15 other charges that my colleagues will explain to you when they get here," I continued, and as if on cue, the building suddenly filled with the sound of sirens. "Did you really think I'd let you hurt innocent people without calling for backup?" James started crying then, actual tears streaming down his face as he begged for mercy he'd never shown anyone else. "Please, Rebecca, I'm sorry about the slap, I'm sorry about everything. I can make this right, I can pay you, I can—" "You can shut up," I said, and turned my attention to the last gunman, who was still holding James but looking increasingly desperate. "You have about 30 seconds to drop your weapon and surrender before this building fills with federal agents. Your choice." He made the smart choice. The weapon hit the floor, James collapsed in a sobbing heap, and it was over. Hannah looked up at me from where Linda was helping her tend to her head wound, and there was something like awe in her eyes. "You saved us all," she whispered. I knelt down beside her, and for the first time in 3 years, I let my real smile show. Sometimes the quiet ones are quiet for a reason. Never underestimate the quiet person in the room. Sometimes we're not weak. We're just waiting for the right moment to show our strength. My colleagues learned that day that the woman they thought couldn't hurt a fly was actually the only thing standing between them and disaster. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Share this with someone who needs to remember that strength comes in all forms. What's the most surprising thing someone has revealed about themselves to you? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, the person you think you know best might just be full of surprises.